When the bombs dropped, 80% of Australia's population was wiped out. Just like that.
This might sound familiar. A devastating tragedy has ushered in the apocalypse, and in its wake, people have been forced to adapt to a harsh, lawless climate. This classic turn-based RPG from Australian studio Drop Bear Bytes is set in, you guessed it, a post-apocalyptic Australia, reducing it to an unforgiving desert full of man-eating spiders, raiders, and even bloodthirsty kangaroos. While that setup is a little too familiar, what's supposed to set Broken Roads apart is an intricate morality system alongside its more traditional RPG character sheet. The prospect of tackling some difficult moral questions seems incredibly promising at first, but after 30 hours of play, it's clear Broken Roads falls short on its own goals to the point where it feels somewhat unfinished.
I said not yet.
How you meet your adventuring party can change depending on the background you choose, but generally nothing connects you to the group of characters you travel with other than bad fortune. You'll always end up traveling to the town of Brookton, which is quickly attacked by raiders from a technologically advanced settlement, and then you inexplicably stay with the town's only survivors instead of going back to wherever you came from. Broken Road's characters and plot are immediately so paper thin that they're genuinely difficult to talk about. You're introduced to a bunch of people who don't have much personality other than being hard-boiled survivors, and then you essentially become responsible for finding them a new home. Why are you getting involved? Why do a bunch of strangers trust you to make the hard decisions? Party members mostly don't speak again after their initial introduction, so it's difficult to tell. Broken Roads even introduces some magical realism later on to try and keep things interesting, but none of these plot points are really set up well.
For your service, sir, we salute you.
The question at the heart of this story is one that many post-apocalyptic games ask. Who decides who should live and who should die? But Broken Roads just doesn't have any interesting answers, which is particularly disappointing when an intricate morality system is supposed to be its centerpiece. Where other RPGs are happy to let you choose a rough alignment, such as lawful good or neutral evil, and call it a day, Broken Roads describes character morality by using actual philosophical principles and gives you a full questionnaire to determine your character's beliefs. Are you a nihilist who puts themselves first in any given situation, or are you more of a humanist who wants the best possible outcome for the largest number of people? That's interesting in theory, but because you have so little control over what happens, this idea falls pretty flat.
Welcome to Kokobi, though maybe you come here all the time.
There are very few conversations involving a moral choice in the first place, and you're locked out of pretty much all other conversation options once you've started down a given alignment path, leaving no opportunities to try something drastically different later. In that way, the hard decisions Broken Roads teases you with are actually pretty straightforward, and the story doesn't change in any interesting ways from the very few moral choices you can make anyway. For example, you can involve yourself in a town's elections, but which mayor gets chosen doesn't have any consequence on the larger events, and isn't even brought up again in any meaningful way after the fact.
Anyway, Dreamer, I'm gone.
Once, a rescued person died immediately after being saved, completely without explanation or acknowledgement from any other characters. This could be a bug, but it's by no means clear. Sometimes quests fail or resolve themselves if you don't get to them in time, though these similarly have seemingly no effect on the storyline or your party. Redoing sections to see if a different decision would dramatically change anything reveals they largely boil down to disappointing dialogue differences. Do you want to be mean or helpful? Broken Roads doesn't give enough reasons to care about what you're doing as a result, and when you do make the effort, the rewards are pretty paltry.
Love ya, you no good delinquent.
This is often just a long line of fetch quests, which doesn't really make it feel as if you're fighting for survival in the outback. It's also tedious stuff. In order to infiltrate a community of philosophers, you'll have to talk to everyone, debate some characters in philosophy, and then scour several cities for a collection of philosophy books. This does make some sense, as you're making an effort in order to befriend a community. It's just not fun to do, and it's often not clear that you need to complete a random side quest to actually continue with the main task. Sometimes a character will ask you something but forget important details like exactly how many of an item they want, leaving you to look it up in the journal. A lot of quests are busy work with no alternative, like exhausting every conversation option with a character. Sometimes you even have to repeat conversations you've already had in order to advance a quest. Broken Roads either tells you exactly where to go or tells you nothing at all, and both can be equally frustrating. You can get into fights along the way, though battles happen very rarely, either as part of the story, which can mostly be avoided, or as random encounters while traveling through the world map, which you can choose to flee from. Combat, which is turn-based in classic RPG fashion, is incredibly frustrating thanks to a very rudimentary UI that makes choosing targets difficult. Meanwhile, the poor enemy AI also makes opponents do almost nothing but attack you constantly, even if they kill their allies or set themselves on fire in the process. It doesn't really matter whether you fight a band of raiders or some angry kangaroos, as these fights play out out pretty much the same every time, hampered by slow animations, a lack of enemy variety, bugs, and few really interesting skills to shake things up. Speaking of angry kangaroos, while it's not very exciting to look at, a lot of love has clearly gone into Broken Road's Australian setting. The writing contains plenty of Australian in-jokes, and a lot of slang that those of us who don't speak Aussie can even hover over for a translation. And though it may not deliver in terms of story, the writing is very detailed and atmospheric, even if the occasional voiceover narration is pretty difficult to listen to.
Jess's voice rends the air a moment before all hell breaks loose.
It's just a shame the writing doesn't deliver where it matters most.
The sound of hail reaches your ears a moment before Sean bursts into the pub, screams and cloying smoke trailing in his wake.
Broken Roads is an ambitious RPG that can't meet the expectations it sets for itself. It asks you to invest in an intricate morality system only to not end up making good use of it, giving you choices that don't lead to much. A lot of this could be forgiven if the story held up, but there really isn't much of a story to begin with. Despite the philosophical angle, Broken Roads tries very hard to get across. Couple this disappointing journey's interesting but poorly executed ideas with often busted combat, and Broken Roads lives up to its name in all the wrong ways. For some more promising interpretations of the post-apocalypse, check out our reviews of the Fallout TV series or Outpost Infinity Siege, and for everything else, stay right here on IGN.